How did two neighboring countries, starting from similar positions, end up on such different paths? Singapore has become an economic powerhouse, a global leader in trade, finance, and innovation. Meanwhile, Malaysia, despite its vast resources and strategic location, has struggled to keep up. What went so right for one and so wrong for the other? In today's video, we're diving deep into this fascinating economic divide. We'll uncover the key decisions that propelled Singapore to first world status and the missteps that slowed Malaysia's progress. More importantly, could Malaysia have taken a different route? And is there still a chance to close the gap? To fully understand this, we need to go back to 1965, the year Singapore and Malaysia parted ways. We'll explore how leadership, governance, and economic strategy shaped their futures. We'll break down why Singapore thrived with foreign investments and a knowledge-based economy, while Malaysia relied heavily on natural resources, leading to a very different trajectory. We'll also examine the role of education, trade, and global positioning in their contrasting development. Singapore transformed itself into a world-class financial and industrial hub, while Malaysia faced political and economic roadblocks. Stick around, because this is a story of strategic decisions, missed opportunities, and a lesson in how nations rise or fall. In 1965, Singapore and Malaysia officially split, marking the beginning of two very different national trajectories. Just 2 years earlier, Singapore had joined Malaysia in a brief political union, but deep-seated tensions over governance, economic priorities, and racial policies led to an unexpected and dramatic separation. When Singapore was expelled, many believed the small island nation wouldn't survive on its own. It had no natural resources, no significant industry, and even its water supply depended on Malaysia. In contrast, Malaysia had abundant land, palm oil, rubber, tin, and petroleum, strong economic pillars that should have secured its long-term success. At the time of independence, both nations had similar economic profiles, heavily reliant on trade and exports. Their economies were shaped by their colonial past under British rule, which had left them with well-developed port cities, a common legal framework, and an export-driven model. Malaysia, with its vast land and agricultural wealth, focused on commodities like rubber and tin, which had been major drivers of its economy since colonial times. Singapore, on the other hand, had no such resources. It was a tiny island with an overcrowded population and few natural advantages. This is where their paths began to diverge. Faced with the urgent need to survive, Singapore had no choice but to reinvent itself. Under the leadership of Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, the government embraced an aggressive industrialization strategy, focusing on manufacturing, trade, and foreign investment. In contrast, Malaysia continued to rely on its natural wealth, confident that its resource-rich economy would sustain long-term growth. At first, Malaysia seemed to have the upper hand. It had a larger population, a bigger domestic market, and valuable exports that contributed to rapid economic development. But over the decades, cracks in its strategy began to show. Dependence on commodities made Malaysia vulnerable to global price fluctuations, and political instability slowed down long-term economic planning. Singapore, on the other hand, leveraged its geographical position, invested heavily in education, and turned itself into a global financial and business hub. The question is, how did Singapore make it work while Malaysia fell behind? The answer lies in governance, economic policies, and strategic planning, factors that would define the success of one and the stagnation of the other. When Singapore gained independence in 1965, its future looked uncertain. It was a small, resource-scarce island with deep social divisions and high unemployment. But what it lacked in natural resources, it made up for with strong leadership and strategic governance. Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's first prime minister, had a clear vision to transform Singapore into a first-world nation. His approach was based on discipline, meritocracy, and zero tolerance for corruption. Lee and his government took decisive steps to ensure long-term stability and economic growth. One of the first major reforms was cracking down on corruption. Singapore established strict anti-corruption laws and created institutions like the Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau, CPIB, to hold public officials accountable. This sent a strong message. If Singapore was going to succeed, it needed a clean and efficient government. At the same time, Singapore embraced long-term economic planning. Unlike many developing nations that focused on short-term gains, Lee Kuan Yew's administration looked decades ahead. The government actively attracted foreign investments, built world-class infrastructure, and implemented policies that encouraged entrepreneurship and technological advancement. Meanwhile, across the border, Malaysia faced a very different reality. While the country had enormous economic potential, political instability and corruption slowed its progress. Frequent changes in leadership and policy shifts made long-term economic planning difficult. Unlike Singapore's meritocratic system, Malaysia implemented affirmative action policies under the New Economic Policy, NEP, which prioritized economic advantages for the ethnic Malay population, Bumi Putera. While these policies aimed to reduce economic disparity, critics argue that they discouraged foreign investment and led to inefficiencies in the economy. Another key difference was policy consistency. Singapore's leadership maintained a clear pro-business stance for decades, ensuring investors felt secure. Malaysia, however, struggled with policy inconsistencies, bureaucratic inefficiencies, and corruption scandals. These challenges made Malaysia a less attractive destination for foreign businesses and hindered the country's ability to fully capitalize on its wealth of natural resources. By the 1980s and 1990s, the results of these contrasting leadership styles became evident. Singapore had positioned itself as a global business hub, attracting multinational corporations and developing cutting-edge industries. Malaysia, despite its economic progress, continued to grapple with governance issues that prevented it from reaching Singapore's level of prosperity. The lesson is clear: leadership matters. Strong, transparent, and forward-thinking governance was the key ingredient that allowed Singapore to rise from a struggling post-colonial state to one of the world's most advanced economies. Malaysia, on the other hand, had all the ingredients for success, but struggled to fully capitalize on them due to political instability and inconsistent policies. From the very beginning, Singapore understood that attracting foreign investment was the key to survival. With no natural resources to rely on, the country had to create an environment where businesses, both local and international, could thrive. This meant implementing business-friendly policies, building world-class infrastructure, and eliminating corruption. Singapore's open market strategy, a business magnet. Lee Kuan Yew and his team designed policies that made Singapore one of the most attractive destinations for investors. They focused on low corporate taxes and business incentives. By keeping taxes competitive and offering attractive incentives to multinational corporations, Singapore became a hub for global businesses. Efficient bureaucracy and zero corruption. Unlike many developing nations, Singapore removed red tape, making it easy for businesses to operate. Corruption was stamped out through strict enforcement, creating a high-trust business environment. World-class infrastructure. From the Port of Singapore, one of the world's busiest, to Changi Airport and ultra-modern financial districts, Singapore invested heavily in infrastructure to support commerce, strategic investments in manufacturing and finance. The government pushed for the development of high-tech industries, electronics manufacturing, and financial services. This helped Singapore diversify its economy early on, reducing dependence on any single industry. A globalized free trade approach. Singapore signed free trade agreements with key economic powers, making it a preferred hub for regional and global commerce. The results? Explosive growth. By the 1990s, Singapore had become an economic powerhouse. It transitioned from a manufacturing-driven economy to a financial and technological hub. Today, the country ranks among the world's top financial centers, home to leading banks, multinational corporations, and cutting-edge startups. Malaysia's resource-based strategy, the risks of over-reliance. Malaysia, on the other hand, took a different path. With vast reserves of palm oil, rubber, petroleum, and other natural resources, the country built its economy around these industries. While this approach initially brought significant wealth, it also introduced vulnerabilities. Dependence on commodity prices. Because Malaysia's economy relied heavily on exports like palm oil and crude oil, it became highly sensitive to fluctuations in global commodity prices. Whenever oil prices dropped, the economy slowed down. Less economic diversification. Unlike Singapore, which actively diversified into finance and technology, Malaysia remained heavily dependent on resource-based industries. Affirmative action policies discouraged foreign investment. The new economic policy, NEP, introduced in 1971, aimed to improve the economic position of the ethnic Malay population, Bumi Putera. While well-intentioned, it created barriers for foreign investors and non-Malay businesses, leading some multinational companies to shift operations elsewhere. Corruption and bureaucracy slowed business growth. Unlike Singapore's pro-business policies, Malaysia's bureaucratic inefficiencies and occasional corruption scandals made it a less attractive destination for foreign investors. The consequences: two diverging economies. While Singapore embraced globalization, innovation, and strategic diversification, Malaysia continued to ride the waves of commodity booms and busts. This made its economic growth less stable compared to Singapore's consistent upward trajectory. Today, Singapore is one of the world's wealthiest nations, ranking high in GDP per capita and business competitiveness. Meanwhile, Malaysia, despite being a regional economic player, still faces economic volatility and struggles to keep pace with its smaller but more agile neighbor. Education and human capital, the key to long-term success. A country's economic growth is only as strong as its workforce. From the beginning, Singapore recognized that investing in human capital was critical to building a competitive, innovation-driven economy. Meanwhile, Malaysia's education system faced challenges that led to brain drain and slowed progress. Singapore's heavy investment in education, building a skilled workforce. Lee Kuan Yew made education a top national priority. His government understood that without natural resources, Singapore's only way forward was through a well-educated, highly skilled population. Key educational policies that fueled Singapore's success. Rigorous and globally competitive education system. Singapore reformed its education system to emphasize science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM, finance, and business. This made Singaporeans highly employable in high-growth sectors like tech and banking. Merit-based approach. Admission to universities and job placements were largely meritocratic, ensuring that the best talent, regardless of background, had opportunities to succeed. Government-industry collaboration. The government worked closely with top multinational companies to design education programs that matched industry needs. This resulted in a workforce that was immediately ready for high-paying jobs in tech, finance, and global business. Lifelong learning programs. Singapore introduced Skills Future, an initiative that encourages citizens to continue upgrading their skills throughout their careers. This keeps the workforce agile and competitive. The outcome: a knowledge-driven economy. By investing heavily in education, Singapore became a magnet for high-tech industries, finance, and multinational corporations. The country's talent pool was highly skilled, innovative, and globally competitive. Malaysia's education system challenges: a missed opportunity. Malaysia, in contrast, struggled with several systemic issues that prevented its workforce from reaching its full potential. Key issues in Malaysia's education system: uneven quality across regions. While urban centers like Kuala Lumpur had access to quality education, many rural areas lagged behind, creating a skills gap. Ethnic-based policies, Bumi Putera policy. Malaysia introduced affirmative action programs that prioritized ethnic Malays, Bumi Putera, in education and employment. While designed to uplift the majority population, these policies sometimes discouraged meritocracy and created barriers for talented non-Malay students and professionals. Limited focus on high-tech skills. Unlike Singapore, Malaysia's education system did not emphasize STEM, finance, and technology as aggressively. This made it harder for Malaysia to transition into a knowledge-based economy. Brain drain. Malaysia's best talent left for better opportunities. Many skilled Malaysians, especially engineers, doctors, researchers, and entrepreneurs, left the country in search of better career prospects in Singapore, Australia, the US, and the UK. This weakened Malaysia's innovation capacity and slowed its progress toward becoming a high-income nation. The consequences: a talent gap that slowed Malaysia's progress. While Singapore produced world-class professionals who fueled its rapid economic growth, Malaysia faced talent shortages in key industries. As a result, foreign investors preferred Singapore over Malaysia when setting up regional headquarters or hiring top talent. If Malaysia had focused on meritocracy, skills-based education, and retaining top talent, could it have mirrored Singapore's success? That's a question worth considering. Geopolitics and trade. Singapore's global strategy versus Malaysia's local focus. A country's geographic location can be a game changer in economic success if leveraged correctly. Singapore and Malaysia both sit at one of the world's most critical maritime crossroads, but they took very different approaches to trade and global positioning. Singapore, from tiny island to global trade and financial hub. Singapore, despite its small size and lack of natural resources, turned its geography into an advantage. The government adopted a pro-business free trade approach that allowed it to become a major global financial and logistics hub. How Singapore mastered global trade and geopolitics. Dan, one of the busiest ports in the world, Singapore's port ranks among the top maritime hubs globally, serving as a crucial connection between Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. It handles millions of containers annually, fueling its economy. Free trade and open markets. Singapore adopted an export-driven economic model, signing trade agreements with major economies like the US, China, and the European Union. This made it an attractive destination for businesses looking to access Asian markets. Global financial center. Singapore positioned itself as a top financial hub in Asia, competing with Hong Kong, London, and New York. Low corporate taxes, strict financial regulations, and a business-friendly environment attracted banks, hedge funds, and multinational corporations. Strong diplomatic ties. Singapore maintained neutral but strategic relationships with global superpowers, ensuring political stability and investor confidence. The outcome: a thriving global business and trade center. By capitalizing on its location, prioritizing international trade, and fostering an open economy, Singapore became a high-income nation with one of the strongest economies in the world. Malaysia, a localized approach that limited growth. Malaysia, despite having a larger landmass and abundant natural resources, did not fully leverage its geographic potential for international trade and finance. Instead, the country focused more on domestic industries and was slower to open up to global markets. Key factors that limited Malaysia's global trade success. Over-reliance on natural resources. While palm oil and petroleum exports generated revenue, Malaysia did not diversify into high-value industries like finance and tech at the same pace as Singapore. Missed opportunity in trade hub development. Malaysia has strategic ports like Port Klang, but bureaucratic inefficiencies and inconsistent policies meant it never reached the same world-class status as Singapore's port. Protectionist policies. Malaysia imposed certain trade restrictions and industry regulations that deterred some foreign investors. While aimed at protecting local businesses, this sometimes limited economic expansion. Weaker diplomatic influence. Malaysia faced political shifts and inconsistent policies, making it less predictable for international investors compared to Singapore's stable governance. The consequences: a slower growth trajectory. Because Malaysia did not fully capitalize on its strategic location or aggressively pursue a global trade approach, it missed out on opportunities to become a dominant financial and logistics hub like Singapore. Could Malaysia change course? If Malaysia adopted more open trade policies, invested in financial services, and streamlined regulations, it could attract more global investment and enhance its position in the global economy. But for now, Singapore remains the clear winner in this aspect. Culture and social policies, how they shaped economic growth. Beyond governance and economic strategies, culture and social policies play a major role in shaping a nation's long-term development. In the case of Singapore and Malaysia, their cultural approaches and social policies led to vastly different economic outcomes. Singapore: meritocracy, discipline, and innovation. Singapore's leadership, under Lee Kuan Yew, established a culture of discipline, hard work, and meritocracy. These values were deeply embedded into government policies, education, and the workplace, creating a high-trust, business-friendly environment. Key cultural and social policies that propelled Singapore forward. Meritocracy over ethnic preferences. Singapore's policies promoted equal opportunities for all races, ensuring that jobs, education, and economic opportunities were awarded based on talent and effort, not ethnicity. Strict anti-corruption measures. A culture of zero tolerance for corruption ensured efficient governance, strong business ethics, and global investor confidence. Work ethic and innovation. The government nurtured a culture of continuous learning, technological advancement, and global competitiveness. This attracted top talent and multinational companies, making Singapore a leading hub for finance, tech, and research. Social harmony and multiculturalism. While ethnically diverse, Singapore maintained a strong sense of unity and national identity, which prevented sectarian divides from interfering with economic progress. The outcome, a unified, growth-oriented society. By fostering meritocracy, social cohesion, and innovation, Singapore created a thriving, knowledge-based economy that ranks among the world's ethnic-based policies and economic imbalances. Malaysia, on the other hand, adopted affirmative action policies that prioritized the ethnic Malay population, Bumiputera, over Chinese and Indian minorities. While these policies were intended to uplift the Malay majority, they also created economic inefficiencies and discouraged merit-based growth. How Malaysia's social policies impacted economic growth. The Bumiputera policy and economic disparities. Introduced in the 1970s under the New Economic Policy, NEP, these policies aimed to increase Malay economic participation. However, they limited meritocracy by favoring one ethnic group over others, discouraging competition and foreign investment. Brain drain of skilled workers. Many highly skilled non-Malay professionals, especially ethnic Chinese and Indians, left Malaysia for better opportunities in Singapore, Australia, and the US. This weakened Malaysia's talent pool, reducing its ability to compete in high-tech industries. Corruption and rent-seeking behavior. The quota system in business contracts, education, and employment led to inefficiencies, as some industries prioritized ethnic considerations over qualifications and performance. Social divides and reduced economic cohesion. Unlike Singapore's unified, meritocratic approach, Malaysia's race-based policies created tensions between ethnic groups, which sometimes hindered economic progress. The consequences: slower, uneven economic growth. While Malaysia still experienced growth, its policies discouraged meritocracy and foreign investment, which contributed to a slower development pace compared to Singapore. Could Malaysia shift toward meritocracy? For Malaysia to compete with Singapore, it may need to reassess its policies, focus on merit-based economic opportunities, and create an environment that encourages innovation and foreign investment. While reforms have been discussed, political challenges make major shifts difficult. Final thought: culture matters in economic success. Singapore's emphasis on discipline, innovation, and equal opportunities led to rapid economic growth and global competitiveness. Malaysia's ethnic-based policies and brain drain issues, on the other hand, slowed its progress. The question remains: will Malaysia evolve its policies to foster greater economic potential? Malaysia and Singapore started from similar positions, but Singapore's strong leadership, investment in education, and open market economy helped it become an economic powerhouse. Malaysia, despite its natural resources, faced slower growth due to political instability, ethnic-based policies, and economic inefficiencies. Key lessons from Malaysia: good governance fosters stability and long-term economic growth. A skilled workforce is essential for innovation and competitiveness. Diversifying the economy beyond natural resources ensures sustainability. Open trade and investment policies attract long-term prosperity. Can Malaysia follow Singapore's path? With bold reforms in governance, education, and economic policy, Malaysia has the potential to achieve stronger, more sustainable growth. The question is, will it embrace meritocracy, innovation, and investor-friendly policies to reach its full potential? What do you think? Should Malaysia adopt Singapore-style reforms to accelerate its progress? Share your thoughts in the comments. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more insights on global economic trends